I do a lot of teaching with very young children, and I found this to be perhaps the most challenging assignment of all. It's very easy to work with motivated players and with strong players. You know, they know the ropes, and you can talk to them on level terms. But when you're dealing with really young children, it's actually quite exhausting to get the message across, and certainly to teach chess in a formal way to this type of audience is a virtual impossibility. I mention this because there's been recent discussion in the media, certainly in England, about the decision in Armenia to teach chess compulsorily in schools. I don't think this is the right way to go. I think chess should be available in a school, and if a child wants to learn it, he or she can learn it, or is able to come to chess and get whatever they want out of the game. Rather than chess come to the child, I think it has to be the other way around. The child should come to chess. And there are also some issues I have with the way chess is often taught by coaches in schools. In my view, the best way to teach chess is for enjoyment. Winning and losing can come later. The risk you run when you teach it the other way round, you somehow convince the child that this is a game where winning and losing is all important. The risk you run is that players might give up a bit later down the line. I've seen this happen so many times. A child leaves primary school and he or she just simply gives up the game because they can't cope with this concept of winning and losing at such an early age. Now, I'm not trying to tell anybody how to coach. I'm well aware that there are many able coaches all over the world who have their own methods of doing things. But I don't think when you teach chess as a means of enjoyment, something to really enjoy and to appreciate, you can go far wrong. Now, with regard to the best way to teach chess right from the outset, it's definitely true that to teach a child how to attack, to create complications, and perhaps to sacrifice pawns in the opening is the right way to begin. I mean, this has been known since the days of Capablanca. This is the best way for any beginner to start. I was reading a cricket coaching manual, just in case somebody is not familiar with cricket. This is a game we play in England and in many of the Commonwealth countries. It was by Viv Richards. And in case you don't know him, he's one of the most successful batsmen ever to have played the game. And he was talking a little bit about the way he learned how to play in the West Indies. And he said, the coach didn't teach me anything technical when I was really young. All he wanted me to do was to bash the ball out of the ground. He wanted to let my imagination fly. So if I was just taking one phrase from that work and transmitting that across to a chess coach, I would say, yes, try to find a way to let the child's imagination fly when you're teaching them how to play chess. I'm not saying that's easy, not at all, but it's certainly an interesting challenge for the serious coach. Now, as far as gambit play goes, I know a lot of coaches do start out with openings like the King's Gambit, but I quite like to teach kids the Danish Gambit, and that starts with e4, e5, d4, e takes d4, and now c3. The point of this fiery gambit is to open up lines for all of White's pieces to stream out and then to get onto the attack. The difference between this and the King's Gambit, in my view, is the safety of White's king. I think kids, once they get past a certain point, have to understand that the king is the most important piece on the chessboard, and that, you know, if you can, you should keep your king safe. So the Danish Gambit offers the White king a measure of security. Now, if I just drop back to e4, e5, yes, f4 certainly promotes attack. But after e takes f4, the White king position can often be a source of concern. And certainly with regard to very young kids, kids won't have the faintest idea of how to protect the king side in this position. So it's much better if you're teaching them the open game to perhaps suggest the Danish Gambit as a means of attack, and maybe even knight takes c3 in this position, rather than bishop to c4. I mean, obviously that's another line, and then we get a position where White's got wide open play for his two-pawn disadvantage. But there's nothing wrong with knight takes c3, and it's a somewhat neglected alternative in this particular variation, the half Danish Gambit, if you like. Now let me show you a game to try to persuade you that this is a worthwhile opening. It comes from a game played in Hungary in 1990 between two very strong players, Sergei Arkhipov playing white and Laszlo Barksay playing black. I believe the black player in this game is a veteran grandmaster, and he'll crash to defeat very quickly. So it just goes to show you that even extremely strong players can fall victim to this old-fashioned Danish gambit. Well, black played knight to c6, traditional move, and now white brought his bishop out to c4. Well, if you're teaching kids, you certainly have to make them aware at some point that the f7 square is the weakest square on the board at the start of the game, and the corresponding weak square in white's camp is f2. They're the only squares on the chessboard that are protected by the king alone at the earliest stage of the game. So it makes sense for white to bring his bishop out to c4 to target f7. And Barksay now plays a typical pragmatic grandmaster move. He brings his bishop out to b4. That pins the knight on c3, and at some point black might be just threatening to take that knight off to damage white's pawn structure. But Arkhipov doesn't seem too bothered by that, and he gets his pieces out with knight f3. Certainly the Danish gambit will teach children that it's very important to get all the pieces out before you start the attack. Once you've got all your pieces onto the board, then you can start attacking. So knight f3 makes perfect sense. And now Barksay makes, well, what I think for a grandmaster is a very bad move. He brings his knight out to f6. I think this is one natural move too many, and it basically puts black's neck on the line. If black wants a better way to play the position, then I think he should go d6 here, when white's got to justify his attacking scheme. Perhaps queen b3 is an interesting move, with a battery of queen and bishop against f7. But then comes bishop takes c3, check, b takes c3, and now the interesting move queen to d7. And the point of that is that if white castles, black's going knight a5, and that's a fork. The queen and the bishop are forked by the black knight. I think we quickly see from this very brief example that a study of gambit openings will learn to a further study of tactical play. And tactics are really the heart of junior chess. You know, if you teach a child how to play tactically, you teach he or she all the tactical ideas in chess, then, you know, they've started in the right way. As I say, back to the game now, Barksay plays his move e5. I really don't like that move. It runs straight into e5. And this is a move which gains time. Time is of the essence in the opening stages of the game, and with this move, white gains time. Note that it will be no use here for black to play a move like queen e7. Although that pins the pawn against the king, it only very temporarily halts white's attack. And if white castles in this position, we quickly see black coming under very heavy fire in the line where he captures the pawn on e5. His queen ends up pinned against the king. Game over. So going back to the game and e5, Barksay decides to lash out with d5. But this gives white the opportunity to launch a nice combination. He takes on f6. Black must recapture the bishop in order to maintain material equality. And now white's pawn takes on g7. Black saves his rook, and now white saves his pawn with bishop h6. So Arkhipov is saying to Barksay, this pawn is really a thorn in your side. If you can't get rid of it, it's going to win the game for me. And even if black exchanges queens off in this position, which is what Barksay does. Of course, exchanging the queen tries to break the white attack, but it brings the white rook into play. I've also found that kids, even quite good players, tend to not know how to use their rooks in a game of chess. So this might be an interesting subject for discussion at some stage with perhaps a moderately talented group of individuals to teach them how to use their rooks. Rooks belong on open files or behind pawns you want to push. Here the rook comes to an open file. Very good indeed. And now, well, I think black probably is struggling. He tries bishop f5, and now white castles. The reason black's struggling, of course, is that his king is stuck high and dry in the middle, whereas white's king is safe. If you can remember that simple idea, get your king to safety early in the game, you're onto a winning start. Barksay moves in to try and block the open file, but he can't block both open files in the centre. And now rook fe1 check forces a very serious concession by black. Black has to move his king. Out comes the king. In comes the white knight. Rook a e8 to challenge the open file. Rook takes e8, slightly surprising move, but white wants to get his knight out of the pin in order to play knight to d5. And this really is a devastating move. White's threatening knight f6 check. He's threatening knight takes c7 check. He's threatening all sorts of things in the middle of the board. Black plays bishop e7 to defend himself, but now comes the crunching winning blow, which Arkhipov has seen before. Knight takes h7. And that wins the game straight away. A small combinative idea. White's threat is knight to f6 check, which would fork the king and rook. And if black takes the knight on h7, we've got the splendid move, knight takes c7, checkmate, ending the game. So to summarise, I think chess in schools should be taught firstly for fun, and winning and losing comes later. To teach a child early on all about winning and losing is virtually impossible when they're very young. I'm not saying teaching chess in schools is easy at all. It's not. It's a big challenge for even a mature and experienced coach. But it's a challenge worth trying to surmount, as the rewards are obvious. When you see a child developing, getting stronger at chess, really enjoying the game, playing the game perhaps their whole life through, well, I'm not sure what better reward there can be.